like the modern vogue for like doing the wicked thing where you like sympathize with your villain characters or like give them something to make them sympathetic has kind of led to the modern, or ties into like Trump in a way, in that like we are more willing to hear out like different perspectives even when those perspectives are clearly horrible and wrong.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't thought of that. I mean, I can't. I mean, that's assuming that like Trump has any sympathy to be seen in him whatsoever. But I get like what you're saying insofar as that like we see people who have done this horrible things. And actually, I kind of relate that to kind of like Hollywood access and that kind of culture more than that, because you get like that, like anytime like a horrible things happens, there's always like we need to seek their perspective, and as a sort of like almost transgressive like viewer seeking thing to hear them speak out.
Yeah,
like it's like that, like we always see things like Harvey Weinstein speaks out. It's almost like that thing. It's almost ritualistic,
right?
Even though like those people really don't deserve a voice anymore.
Well, the Harvey Weinstein I think is a little different. It's more a matter of like all the people on the internet who are like, well, we should hear out, you know, the Nazis. We should we should hear what they have to say.
That exists, yeah, as far as... And there's also, like, I think there's, like, the American habit of just, like, abusing other sidism, especially in the case where it's, like, we have built such a rigorous, like, two-party state.
Right.
That, like, the fact... It doesn't really matter what the other side is anymore. Like, I think we've come to a point where, like, gay marriage is really a thing that's just kind of cultural change that, like, in theory, shouldn't really be discussed as a controversy yet.
Yeah.
You always have to have some bumfucker from Alabama saying homosexuality is Satan.
Yeah.
That's just something that's just built into our nation.
Oof.
So
yeah,
it's interesting.
That's just a kind of a loosely constructed theory that I kind of came up with this morning.
No, that is interesting insofar as that like how we like there's no such thing as the villain anymore.
Yeah. Right.
The villain does not exist anymore. It's only just like, oh, but from their perspective.
Which is, in a way, it's sometimes good because, like, it's giving us more, like...
some good movies and some good media.
Yeah, it gives us more, like, nuanced characters in our drama.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because I listened to the Vidiots episode on Into Darkness again, because I think that's one of the best things...
That's just a great episode.
That's one of the best things they've ever done. And Clay gets all up in arms about how they give Khan this, like, tragic backstory, and it's like, yeah, I see what you're saying here. Like, you know, you're giving this guy who's supposedly, like, the embodiment of evil, like, this just...
You're trying to give, like, oh, it's all for, I'd do anything for my crew, that sort of, like... but yet, oddly, like, that sympathization is oddly even more fascist than their original, like, idea. That's a thing that comes... Like, that's something I've noticed that, like, oftentimes their sympathetic backstory is literal fascism.
Yeah,
That's a thing that happens, but... I guess, like, another... God, I forgot what I was going to say. But, yeah, that's really interesting as far as... Well, the con thing is... Like, you strip what makes a character unique and, like, interesting by, like, trying to make them sympathetic.
Yeah.
Though, granted, like, I am also the person who thinks the most interesting side of World War II is the literal Nazis.
Yeah.
What that says about me is something... Well, granted, but that's because, like, I don't... Whenever you do something like that, you come in from the perspective of, these are monsters, let's see why they're monsters.
Well, yeah, that's infinitely more interesting to explore in artistic works than the American side of, oh, we're gonna go fight evil. Like, that's...
And even, like, that side's kind of, like, come to the wayside, because I think, like, Lindsay Ellis said, like, now we're gonna know what they're gonna find on the other side of those woods.
Oof.
But, yeah, that's fat. Maybe we should watch movies that reinforce that.
That could be interesting.
So, yeah.
We'll come back to that.
We'll talk to Reed about it and see what he thinks, if anything at all.
All right. One other thing I just wanted to tell you, because I finally found, again, I was perusing the bonus features on my friend's Lord of the Rings box set the other day.
Really?
And, because I remembered watching a couple of featurettes, like, way back when I had the extended edition. So, I found this one. So there's this one where Elijah Wood tells this story, and I'd forgotten, like, the details of this, but I've told this story several times. Okay, so Elijah Wood says, "Okay, so I was backstage at the Golden Globes, and Jack Nicholson was there, and I started talking to him about Lord of the Rings, and he says to me like, 'Did you die?' And he goes, 'Well, it all depends on like how you look at it. I mean, but you saw like Frodo get on the boat, right?'
Yeah.
And he's like, 'What are you talking about? I left the theater a half hour before that.' And he's like, 'Wait, so you didn't see the end of the film?' 'Oh, no. Too many endings, man. Should have ended that shit sooner.' And he's like, so Jack didn't see the end of the movie. He went out to get the car warm for his family." And I think when I first saw that clip, I didn't really know who Jack Nicholson was, because this was many years ago. So, and now that I do know who Jack Nicholson was, it makes that story even better.
Well, of course Jack would do that. You don't waste Jack's fucking time.
Too many endings, man.
They just faded the black just a few too many fucking times. That's the thing. If they didn't use the fade to black, I don't think we'd be bitching and moaning that much.
Some
we
people
just cut
probably
to these
would.
Things.
Some people probably would. But I don't care. I also watched Lindsay Ellis's videos about Lord of the Rings recently, and those are...
Oh yeah, those are great.
Those make some interesting watches. But anyway, hey everybody, welcome back to the Hack Fraud Show.
We've been watching movies.
We've been watching movies, among other things, and we're continuing
documentaries.
We're continuing Spooktober this week with a couple of movies that were much better than what we watched last time.
Yeah, that was a certainty.
Yes, we looked at two kind of early classics of the American horror genre. That would be Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby and William Friedkin's The Exorcist.
And what are these? Like, is it like Rosemary's Babies? What, that 66?
68, I think that came out.
And then
Exorcist was
73?
Yeah, 73.
Okay.
First horror film to be nominated for Best Picture. Fun fact.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we will get to those in due course. Reed will not be joining us this week, regrettably.
Fucked him. We'll just put it that way.
Well,
insofar as his schedule fucked him.
Yes. Sadly, he was not able to experience the satanic wonder of these two movies. I didn't really think about this going into it, but both of these movies involve Satan in a very deep and real way.
In a very literal and very evocative way.
Yeah.
One of them even says, "Hail Satan."
Oh, yes. But we'll get to that shortly. John, hey, what have you been watching?
But I had to watch a shitload of documentaries.
Oh boy!
Because at the Wexner Center, they were having this sort of film festival called Unorthodox, because it has docs at the end. Get it? But like they had like a series of like independent and independent documentaries that come to town. One of them was. Both of them were made by Pittsburgh filmmakers, and one of them explicitly about Pittsburgh. One of them was Quest, about like a neighborhood about a North Philadelphia neighborhood. The other one was Braddock, a Rust Bowl fantasy, and no, it's not about Trump. It was made in the 80s.
Okay. But
yeah, I had to see 3 documentaries. There was that one. There was a one before it called Rat Film, which is about Baltimore and rats, and of course it's always about race. And then another documentary, which was a compilation of like independent short documentaries, some of which better than others. I guess I'll start with short. I'll go in chronological order that I saw these things.
Okay.
Because like I don't really know how to talk about shorts, because like nobody who isn't in Columbus will be able to see the same thing I saw. Like the only thing you'd be able to do is like see some of the documentaries. So like let's go quickly. First little short was called Fish Story, about a man going through and like apparently they opened an aquarium in Wales, and to do that they brought in a bunch of people with fish-like surnames, including a weatherman for the BBC called, I believe, Michael Fish.
Okay. And
which would be really funny as a 5-minute YouTube video, but as like a 12-minute short film, that's not as good.
Oh.
Though it does have some golden moments, such as a song written about the weatherman Michael Fish at the end. And like they don't call it an aquarium; it's called a sea zoo.
Ooh.
Which seems like something right out of a Wes Anderson film.
A sea zoo.
Sea zoo.
I'm surprised that wasn't in The Life Aquatic, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'm surprised that wasn't either. But next one was a film called, I think it was called Field of Vision.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, like, over Kabul, Afghanistan, there was this, like, surveillance blimp.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows what it does. Nobody is able to know what it does. All we know is that, like, it has cameras, and it's flying over Kabul, Afghanistan, and, like, you can pretty much see it from every point in the city. And it's about, like, it's pretty much about, like, a guy went to Kabul and just pretty much showed just, like, how many places in the city you see this thing. Like, he interviewed someone who thought it was God, which was really interesting. And then we see, oh, wait, they have another one over Maryland, and it's spying on us. Mm. And it's all about just, like, encroaching security, militarism. I do agree that, like, because I brought Alex and Matthew to this because I wanted to torture them too. And like one of the things he said is like, like I get what you're saying here, but I kind of wish I knew more about what the people in Kabul thought of it, instead of just like ominous images of it juxtaposed with blimps and church with mosques and churches.
Right.
But overall, it's actually pretty interesting. The next one was also about balloons. It's called Balloon Fest. Tyler, have you heard of the Cleveland Balloon Fest?
I have not heard of the Cleveland Balloon Fest.
Okay, this is a story. In 1986, Cleveland wanted to set a Guinness World Record for the amount of balloons released. So they set up this giant net in downtown Cleveland and placed 1.5 million balloons in it, and then released it all at once. You can get video of this. It's actually it's wonderful and hilarious, and I love it. But apparently, because the balloons then hit a like storm front, a lot of them came back down and ruined traffic. Apparently, 2 men were lost at sea, and because of the balloons, no one could find them until the police washed up later. It apparently damaged livestock and agricultural holdings. And you know what happened afterwards?
What?
Guinness didn't recognize it.
Of course not. Of course not.
And so, like, this is pretty much, like, imagine if someone made, like, an in-place documentary of the Cleveland River Fire, and that's kind of what this is. And it's hilarious, and it's the best one on there.
Wow.
The next one was about the Standing Rock Indian Reservation protest, and it's terrible. Well, mostly because of, like, kind of like what we said about Detroit, like, if you knew nothing about the Standing Rock Indian Reservation, I guess sit-in is what you'd call it.
Yeah.
Then, like, if you knew nothing before the film, you know nothing after the film. It's like, it is just like, it has like 2 like just absolutely incomprehensible pieces of narration from people who were there. It just shows us, it gives us no context as to why these people here or like who they are other than like vaguely Native Americans. Like we don't know like what tribes they belong to or anything of that sort. We just know like Native Americans and like, oh look, here they are. It is just like there's some interesting filmmaking in it because like there's some gorgeous compositions with the sky and just some like there's a point where like slow motion fireworks. So it's a pretty piece of film, but ultimately just hollow and without substance. The next film was like a pretty interesting sort of like almost like stop motion kind of work about an African American anarchist from like I believe it was the early 20th century, which is interesting woman, interesting life, decent slideshow. It's okay. Again, like it's like if you didn't already, I guess like it's okay. It holds your interest. I think the last one, if I can recall correctly, was one. It was called Eddie and Edith. It's about like the oldest interracial couple ever. It's like these two 96-year-olds who are like this really adorable couple, and like, but they're also cared for by like the wife in this situation. Her daughter takes care of them, and like apparently there's like some custody disputes about care, and it becomes about mortality and like what happens and dementia and how we care for old people. And that's like a really adorable, really fascinating short. So yeah, shorts. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. I think they're all interesting to a certain regard. So that was a fulfilling experience. The next film I saw, and this is now a completely different film. This wasn't a part of shorts.
Okay.
It's called The Rat Film.
Yeah.
It's about rats in Baltimore. And of course, it becomes about race because everything about cities in America becomes about race.
Yep.
And we see like a bunch of people who like in some way hunt rats. Like one of them is like just like a basic exterminator. He goes around. He goes around. He's I think he's probably the most interesting person in the film because he at certain points he goes on diatribes about like being an agnostic and like the nature of like the city, and that's really fascinating. Another one is like two dudes who hunt rats with a fishing rod and a bat. And another guy who, like, pretty much hunts them like he would hunt deer.
Uh-huh.
And, yeah, and, like, just seeing them is fascinating and, like, wonderful. And also about, especially the latter two, it becomes kind of about, like, using, like, the need for violence upon, like, a pest that really does them no harm. Especially the fishing rod and bat people. Like, what they are doing is pointless. And it is, you just kind of get to say, like, they're just doing this for the fun, the sick fun of it. But there's also diatribes about, like, Baltimore and, like, attempts to, like, get rid of the rat population and how that intersected with, like, how they treated black neighborhoods and reviews of black neighborhoods and how a lot of the documentation of, like, 1940s black Baltimore was done through looking for ways to exterminate rats. And it also talks about redlining and like how like when they were handing out loans, certain neighborhoods were called financially risky, so like it became near impossible to get out of those towns because of just the way they got set up. And then it shows like how that has affected Baltimore and its development. So I think, and like the sound design is wonderful. I mean, like the sound design, the music is great. I can't remember who did the music for it, but it's just wonderful. It looks beautiful at times. Sometimes it's shocking. Sometimes it's funny. I think it's an all-around really great piece about the city of Baltimore.
Well, now I'm just disappointed that The Wire didn't do a season about the rat-catching industry in Baltimore.
You know, I'm curious how that film would fit with The Wire.
that might be interesting.
Yeah, interesting. It has nothing to do with police, but it does have like a lot to do with like people living about like the black community in Baltimore.
Well, yeah, that's something The Wire addresses a lot as well.
Yeah, so maybe I'll come back to that. Ooh. But because I kind of want to wrap this up, the last documentary I saw was a film called Braddock, a Rust Bowl fantasy. Uh-huh. Braddock is an old steel town on the Monongahela. I'm from Pittsburgh and I can't remember this. It's called the Mon. They just call it the Mon. They call it the Mon Valley, and it's like 6 miles from downtown Pittsburgh. I think it's like 3 hours from Oakland, which is where I was. The guy who made it is like the guy who made it came to our class and talked to us. His name is Tony Buba, and he is a delightful person.
Oh, good.
He is an utterly delightful person, and like the film is kind of really meandering. Like at first, it starts being about Braddock as this failing steel town. As it was filmed in the '80s, it's set in the '80s. It's about documenting the fall of the steel industry and them closing down the Braddock plants and the one in Homestead, which is where they built the movie theater. And it's all about the sort of like the fault, the fail. It's not so much like the spectacle of like, oh, the poor working man. But I guess like it could be used as that, as far as like I'm curious how it plays now, considering like the spectacle of like the forgotten working town has been used. But like it's also interesting because like the man, like Tony Buba, is a Marxist, and like and he does not really, and as much as he was a factory worker, he fits far more the old socialist norm than the modern sort of like we've been left behind. Let's blame the migrants. Working class man, right? Which is horrible, but the movie really doesn't become about that. At a certain point, it then becomes about Buba's relationship to Braddock. Like whenever like people from like the city proper send people to report on Braddock and its failings, they talk to Tony Buba because he's kind of their public face. And then it becomes about like a character from Braddock called Sweet Saul, who is like an old-fashioned sort of like he's an Italian Catholic hustler. He talks really fast, he curses all the time. He's the kind of person you'd see in like a Scorsese movie played by De Niro or Pesci or something like that.
Yeah.
And like it becomes, and then the movie almost becomes about like indulging him and Tony Bubba's relationship to him, and that's all really fascinating. And it becomes about trying to make movies with him, both starring him and about him. And like it kind of just becomes a portrait of like this man and how he's both been like formed and broken by Braddock. And ultimately enough, like the movie just kind of becomes about like not so much the town itself, but about just like the broken people left in its wake, just like the people who have nothing left. There's like the movie ends on like a bunch of I think they're outside of like there's like people outside of St. Paul's Cathedral, and like one of them talks. And they talk about like you left us behind, and like they're screaming at reporters and so forth. And like another time where just like they talk to like a now laid off steel worker, and he just looks into the cameras like, maybe I go to Youngstown. I don't fucking know. There's nothing left. What do I do? And that there's like this genuine sense of loss. And like it's also about filmmaking at a certain point. Like the reason this is so meandering because the film is so meandering. Like it just kind of just jumps from like thing to thing. Like some of them fascinating, some of them not.
Yeah.
But like overall, like I think this film has just a ton of character. I mean, not just like that's like I'm not even really. I really have no relationship to this world. Like I lived in Pittsburgh. My family's from Pittsburgh, but our world is so much different than Braddock.
Yeah.
And like these old steel towns.
I was just saying, well, this sounds like just super interesting. I mean,
yeah, and it's dark and it's funny and it's tragic, and like if you have any interest in like in the Rust Belt and like this part of America, I think you'll find something interesting in it. I think and it just has a lot of character and a lot of passion, and especially and there is something to be said about like how like I saw the man and he's a delightful man and how much that gets into it. But like Tony Bubba is a delightful presence to guide your movie, and like there's disparate narration that repeats what people on the camera say, which is really funny. So like if any of this sounds interesting, I'd seek it out. It's called Braddock, a Rust Bowl fantasy.
Well, I may check that out. That sounds really, really interesting.
Granted, well, you have they do go to Pitt at one point, which is fascinating.
Oh boy. I was frantically trying to Google it while you were talking, but I'll get back to that later.
Yeah, like if that sounds interesting, I'd recommend it. But it's only 80 minutes.
Oh, good.
All of these are only 80 minutes.
Well, that's as good a way as any to sell me on a movie.
Yep. But yeah, I think I think I've talked long enough. If I've seen anything else, oh shit, I did see something else.
Oh. What was that?
I'll let you talk. I'll get back to
this. Okay.
Entire another thing altogether.
Well, I had a rather diverse week of watching. With my friend, I watched Ron Howard's Rush, a movie that most people seem to have forgotten about. I don't think it got a lot of attention at the time, even. This is a really good movie. It's not amazing or anything, but it is very, very good. So, it's based on a true story. Daniel Bruhl from Inglourious Bastards and some other things, and Chris Hemsworth play these like rival Formula One racers in the 70s. It's kind of like the Amadeus of race car movies, although that maybe makes it sound better than it is. But it kind of is actually like
that sounds fascinating.
Chris Hemsworth is like this kind of the freewheeling playboy type, and Daniel Bruhl is like just this serious-minded, determined, singularly focused kind of madman. It's a good movie. The performances are really good. This is the great Chris Hemsworth performance that everyone who hasn't seen this movie has been waiting for. He is really, really great in the movie. It's got a lot of great style to it. It looks really, really good. Like, it's so crazily stylistic in a way that Ron Howard almost never is. So, I would recommend checking it out. It's a very solid movie.
Cinematographer by Anthony Dodd Mantle.
Sure. Props to that guy.
Apparently he's worked with Lars von Trier and Danny Boyle.
Oh. Well, I certainly buy that.
That's really interesting. This came out September 2013. How did I never hear about this?
It just got no attention. Like, it came out, like, the reviews were pretty good. I've had multiple people tell me that it's a really good movie, and it just...
Hans Zimmer did the music? What the fuck? Yeah, the cast is stacked? How did this just fall off the edge of the earth?
I don't know.
I think Howard has a pretty high, like, profile.
It came out at, like, a uniquely kind of packed time, I think. Like, Oscar season 2013 was... a big kind of... That had all kinds of things going on.
In September.
I think it kind of got lost in the shuffle. I don't know how that happened.
What the fuck?
But there you go.
Interesting. You know, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, Ron Howard's Rush. So,
interesting.
There you go. Let's see. I also watched a movie called Blue Valentine. Have you heard of this movie?
I don't think I have.
Okay.
I'm going to go to the internet to make sure.
This movie... I think this movie might have also come out in... Was it 2013? Maybe it was 2011. I don't remember.
2010.
Oh, okay, yes. So, Blue Valentine stars Ryan Gosling and Michelle Williams as this couple. The movie kind of in parallel intercuts, like, them first getting together and then years later their marriage falling apart. It's a very well done movie. It's got a lot of authenticity to it. It's very, like, verite. The director is apparently known for, like, really pushing for authenticity. Like, there's a scene in this movie where, like, Ryan Gosling, like, threatens to, like, jump off a bridge, and, like, apparently, like, Michelle Williams didn't know that he was going to do that. Like, the director just, like, told them separately, like, their two opposing goals for the scene, and, like, just decided to, like, see what they would do. This is the same director who made The Light Between the Oceans, which involved Alicia Vikander and Michael Fassbender, like, living together in a cabin for months, I think. So the acting is very, very good. Michelle Williams is great. Ryan Gosling's very good. It's a very well done movie. I didn't really connect with it. I think this was just kind of a personal thing. I just wasn't super on board with it. Also, part of the problem was that I watched it, like, last night just because I was kind of casting about for a movie to watch, and once I was about halfway through the movie, I was kind of like, I'd really rather be watching, like, Die Hard right now. But by then I'd already, you know, sunk an hour.
You've already put too much time into it.
Right.
Like, we as film people need to say, like, damn it, I want to talk about this movie. I have to finish it.
Yeah, I'd already sunk an hour of time into it, so I was like, well, I guess I might as well just finish it. But it's good. A notable
thing I see on the Wikipedia page, the band Grizzly Bear scored the film.
Yeah, I don't know. Parts of it do kind of edge into, like, indie land territory, and, like, not in a good way, but it's still a good movie. I'm not sure you would like it, but it's it
doesn't sound like something that... It sounds interesting, but just not something that'd be up my...
Yeah.
I hate indie land.
Yeah. Let's see. I finally finished the first season of Twin Peaks.
Oh, shit.
Good, solid season of television. Very interesting. Ends with a real cliffhanger. I will be getting back to Twin Peaks at some point. I'm not totally sure when. I don't think this is going to be a binge. I think this is going to be more of a steady, I'll finish it whenever I finish it kind of thing. Okay. I've heard that season 2 is kind of a slog, so I'm by no means eager to bounce right back into it.
Well, season 2 is when everyone said, wait a minute, David Lynch just wants to troll us.
So we'll see about that. But also, I am now filling that gap with Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh, shit! What do you think of that so far?
I'm only, like, 5 or 6 episodes in. So far, it's good. They do a very, very good job of kind of establishing the world, like, right off the bat. The animation's very good. The voice acting is pretty good. It's a little weird. I mean, you definitely feel some, like, tonal whiplash at the beginning of this, like, where it's kind of vacillating between this, like, high epic drama about, like, warring nations and then fart jokes. So it's kind of a...
It's still on Nickelodeon.
Yeah, you can feel it growing into itself, but pretty much everybody who's ever seen this show says that it's great, so it's
kind of like one of the, like, universally beloved things of, like, our generation's nostalgic viewing.
Yeah. So I'm going to stick with it, probably. They're only, like, 22-minute episodes, so it's good to just kind of throw on if you have, like, nothing to do. And and again, just the world building of it is great. It's also, like, I feel like this is a good way to like dip my toe into the waters of anime, because I have long been skeptical of anime, and this show is clearly very stylistically influenced by that.
Yeah, though I'm not sure just like how, because like I've seen some anime, and I'm not entirely sure just how much of a testing ground The Last Airbender will be for that. That might be up to. It's been so long since I've seen anything of The Last Airbender. Yeah. Like Alex has said he was determined to make me see it, but we just never got to it because each of us are busy men.
Yeah, but
so like it is just something that like one day I just will force myself down to look at it.
Just the way it's drawn, the art style, and the faces and everything.
Is certainly Japanese inspired. I'm not gonna deny that.
It gets into all of that, so it's interesting. I will probably stick with it, and we'll see where I am in a couple of months.
Alrighty.
Because there's about 60 episodes, but and then finally, my roommates and I ventured out Monday night to see Sean Baker's The Florida Project. Now, this is a 2017 film, newly released in limited release. You know, I am hesitant. You could take your fingers out of your ears for a second. I am hesitant to overpraise movies generally, and especially on this show, because I'm worried about getting people's expectations too high.
Yeah, well, expectations can kill a movie.
Yes, expectations play a much bigger part in your experience of watching a movie than I think a lot of people often admit. But this movie's incredible. This movie is one of the best movies ever made. Like this is the first time I can recollect like seeing a movie in theaters like for the first time and thinking like this is a new classic. Like this is a movie we will be talking about in 30 years. Like this is the first time I walked out of a movie and was like, that was unquestionably one of the best things I've ever seen.
So like the indie version of Mad Max Fury Road.
In a way. I mean, Mad Max took me a few watches to get to that point, but no, this movie, it's so incredibly done. It's very episodic and kind of loosely structured, and like those movies can sometimes wear kind of thin, and like so I kept watching it like waiting to get bored. I was like, okay, I'll probably get bored at some point, and I didn't. It just keeps ever, you know, surprising you and turning and moving and living and breathing, and it's so incredible, and it's mostly like non-professional actors. I think Willem Dafoe is the only established star in the movie. He's great, by the way. I want him to win all the awards.
William Dafoe can do no wrong, except when he's in a Spider-Man
movie. Well, yeah, but yeah, he's great. All like the kids in this movie are fantastic. The lead one, especially, I think she's 6 or 7 years old. She's fantastic. The emotional things she's called on to do in this movie are just insane. And this movie, I think, more effectively deconstructs the Disney myth than anything else I've ever seen. Not in like an aggressive, like in your face way, just in like,
oh no, we're putting the Disney castle in stark monochrome.
Well, no, not even like that. No, not at all like that. In a very like subtle way until the end, where it becomes much more apparent, but still in a way that feels completely natural to the movie. It kind of just explores that idea, because the movie centers around like this kind of impoverished community living on the outskirts of Disney World in Orlando, and they live in this like discount motel that's called the Magic Castle. It looks like something straight out of a Wes Anderson movie if Wes Anderson had like grown up in a low income neighborhood. It's unbelievable. The filmmaking is top notch. Just so much incredible stuff in this movie. It's like shortlist for best of the decade, best of the year for sure, maybe best of like the new millennium. Like I firmly believe this is a movie that people are going to discuss in 50 years and hold in the canon. Like this is it's an incredible work.
You need say no more, friend. I will. If I can ever fucking find it, I will go out and see it.
I believe and sincerely hope that it will be a big player at the Oscars. So if nothing else, I'm sure it'll get a big kind of Oscar contention release at some point. So yeah, The Florida Project. Everyone should see it.
First from his mouth, and well, there's probably been many mouths who have said that.
No.
Are there?
Yeah, I think so. Well, the AV Club gave it an unqualified A, which is always something that makes me take notice of a movie. Okay. So there you go.
Alrighty. So the Florida Project. Have you seen anything else, or?
Nope, that's all I've got.
Alright, it's time for me to talk about inferior things.
Oh boy.
The first thing I watched, and these both things are for like a TV class, which has been an interesting class because it's kind of made me look at a bunch of things which are kind of either cultural icons or critical darlings that I just somehow miss just because of my pretty restrictive television viewing habits.
Yeah.
To be honest, though granted, I do think that like my media consumption is pretty diverse. Like I consume like video games and like and the internet and movies, but I just don't get the TV very often, other than like the television news and things like that,
sure.
and sporting events. But I watched the first episode of Orange is the New Black.
Oh.
Tyler, have you ever seen this?
Not all the way through, no.
Well, what little of it that you have seen, what did you think?
Whatever. I mean, it just didn't strike me as super interesting.
That's kind of where I'm at. Well, the first thing I will say is that like it's a kind of interesting depiction of like how loved ones react to somebody going to prison, and like in like a really sort of like sanitized, almost whitewashed way. Whereas like you have like just the super loving husband and like the parents and so forth. But like they are honestly just kind of like, oh shit, this is happening. What do we do?
Yeah.
But of course, like they have money and they aren't going to be hurt financially by any of this. So there is that. I guess like what strikes me the most from this, it kind of feels like watching like some kind of HBO show where like they really like show like we can be R and like we don't have to care about like what we show. Mm-hmm. This like entire show opens on like a shower scene in like the prison, and it just seems so much like boobs. We can show boobs. Look at this. Look at this. We can show sex, and people can say fuck, and we can show lesbians, and look at this. Look how transgressive we are. In like a way that never feels natural.
That's been a big problem for HBO, I think, for a really long time.
Every HBO show I've ever watched, it's like I would have like saw it when I was 13 and felt like I was getting in on something. I was getting the joke. But now it just feels like really not amateurish, but just sort of infantile.
Well, yeah, like it's so strange to me that Game of Thrones is now like kind of leaning into like
television.
Well, it's weird that show is like leaning into like female empowerment and its strong female characters, considering just how often like it used to do like sex position scenes. That's all very strange.
I guess that's a good evolution, but
I don't know.
But regardless, as far as like there are some interesting things in it, but ultimately I just kind of got like that HBO sort of like if I was 13, I would have liked it.
Yeah.
But like now, it's just kind of like
I don't know. I will say that show does seem to be like pretty progressive in terms of its casting. I think
it is pretty progressive as far as like, and it is just in the first episode there is like they like mention like mandatory minimums and like the sort of race dynamic of the prison. So there is some pretty progressive stuff in there, and it's also like our character kind of losing her composure in the first episode is pretty sincere. So I think it's got some interesting aspect, but he's not for me.
Okay.
But the next thing I watched, and like I swear I'm only going to fucking do this like week-long update when there's something of note to talk about.
Okay. There's
the second episode of Kino's Journey. I am only going to do this like when there is something of note.
Okay.
This episode this is the first one this is the second episode. And already they're dipping back into old material that they've already done, which is not a good thing. Second of all, is like it must be noted that like when they did this episode in the original show, it was a two-parter. They had 45 minutes, and like there was 5 episodes before. So at this point, we know like who Kino is, like the whole 3 days thing, and like general sort of like moral hierarchy she has. That becomes sort of the testing point for the rest of it. Because, like, for all the shows, like, really obvious, like, parables, like, there is always something grounded in a sense of, like, we learn something new about our main character. That's sort of, like, the general structure. Whereas in this, Kino just feels like a fucking psychopath. like there's a point where like in the original show, like this episode where like she goes to like some massive coliseum, and like you have to like fight to the death, and like there's this insane king and so forth. And like the rules of it are that like if you surrender and the other person accepts your surrender, you can go home. Mm-hmm. You're fine. So like in the original, Kino tries all she can to make it so like she just makes people surrender. She doesn't actually have to kill anyone. This should just cap someone in the chest. And later on, we hear someone say, "Well, I haven't killed anyone." I care, Japan. You can't slide that shit past me. And later on, like there is in the original where like they're like somebody like she assassinates the king, and like there's this big thing. It's like, all right, the next king is going to be whoever participates in you're going to have to be the next king by participating in this giant bloodbath. Mm-hmm. In the original, they like they just leave and we don't see anything. In this, they like go into a bloodbath, and like she just smiles at one of the guards and says, if you wish to stay alive, you should leave. And then the movie, and then it ends with jangly guitar music.
Okay.
It's kind of bad.
Well, that's not good.
Yeah, so like it's kind of it has things to say about violence, but ultimately like it's just wildly misguided. In a show called Kino's Journey, to not get your main character this early on is a pretty big red flag.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of like, because like the thing about this show in its like original incarnation is that like it presents you these like pretty broad parables, but kind of just like lumps layers upon them as it kind of just complexes its own self, and as like there are like so many contradicting points of view and like contradicting events that like it really does become like a really balanced, really ambiguous piece of work. Whereas in this, just they're evil like pseudo Germanic Romans who wear pickelhabas and wear iron crosses.
Oh man!
So there's more. If I hadn't already wasted so much time on the documentaries, I would say more, but, like, we have to fucking move on. So, second episode isn't very good. I'm not abandoning it yet. I'm just not very hopeful.
Okay. All right, well, I guess we'll see where that goes.
Where that goes. I might venture, if I find something more interesting to talk about it, which I probably will eventually, because this is just kind of my crack. But regardless, we're ready to talk about some horror movies?
Ooh, let's do it. Right. Okay, should we start with Rosemary's Baby?
I'd love to start with Rosemary's Baby.
Okay, Rosemary's Baby, directed by Roman Polanski, a controversial figure for all kinds of reasons that we don't need to get into, although I will say it makes a certain scene in this movie incredibly awkward to watch.
Yeah, even kind of...
Even more so that
like this is like why I find it like really difficult to disconnect what a director's done and what and their movies. Woody Allen is really bad with this.
Yeah.
But regardless, what we are here to talk about, there are so many other spaces that like the like morality of like liking Roman Polanski movies should be discussed. We're here to talk about movies.
Yeah, I still say you can like the movie while fully dismissing the director as a person.
I generally agree, though there are exceptions.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we're not going to get too far into that. Because Rosemary's Baby is a movie that I enjoyed quite a bit.
I did too, Tyler. I think this is a really interesting Catholic guilt movie.
Okay, yes. I think the premise of this movie is really pretty well known. These two... I don't think they're newlyweds, but like this young couple, played by Mia Farrow and John Cassavetes, move into this very nice-looking New York apartment.
But, it's creepy, and the other person's died, and the other inhabitants have died. Therefore, it's for sale.
Can I just say though, John Cassavetes is supposed to be a struggling actor, and Mia Farrow doesn't work. How the fuck do they afford that apartment?
It's like,
I mean,
my God.
this is 1966, but like,
must be like fucking, you are New York royalty. You're in the middle of Manhattan in something that in a place where it looks like John Lennon could live.
Well, it is the place where John Lennon lived.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's all a bit strange. But anyway, so they move in. They have these elderly neighbors who are kind of nosy and prying and a little bit weird.
Nosy. Bit of like overbearing Catholic grandmother about them.
Yes. And then One night, Rosemary has this, what seems to be a very bizarre dream in which
Yes.
she is raped by the devil himself. And
do we want to talk about this?
We'll get back to that. I just want to get the basic plot summary out of the way here.
Okay.
So then she discovers that she is pregnant, supposedly by her husband, but as time goes on, she starts to suspect that her neighbors are planning to take her baby for use in some kind of satanic witchcraft ritual.
Yes,
and
like people give her books on witchcraft,
yes.
and she goes and researches. And like, there's like this really interesting thing where like she is just in immense pain for like the majority of her pregnancy.
Yeah, that's all very interesting. And like, this movie more than anything is like kind of a psychological horror, like watching the descent of this woman into what seems to be just complete insanity. And then
and like, there's like a certain, she just kind of flies into paranoia at a certain point, and like you just kind of see like the people. It oddly becomes a movie about marriage and just how dismissive this husband is at times.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah,
I'm not too sure if this was something that was really intended by Roman Polanski, but I think that's there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, you kind of see like John Cassavetes is kind of very dismissive and not really super supportive. I mean, and he's kind of all wrapped up in his own stuff for reasons that
often, like, he's just often not there.
Yeah, yeah. It all becomes very much about Mia Farrow after a certain point.
Which is good. Mia Farrow was fun to watch.
Oh, she's great. But then, of course, the end of the movie reveals that she has literally given birth to the Antichrist.
Which is...
in a scene which is hilarious.
Oh my fuck. Hail Satan!
Oh, seeing all these...
Oh, gods!
Seeing all these adorable old people cheerfully yelling, Hail Satan! is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in a movie.
Oh my God. And they just have a little man who I think it's like supposed to be a Japanese man just like taking pictures of his Polaroid. There's like this super theatrical, all black like crib he's in with the upside down cross.
Yeah.
He has his father's eyes.
Oh. I love that. But yeah,
so
this is a very, very entertaining movie.
It is.
Watching Mia Farrow just descend into ever escalating hysterics is very fun to watch, and also at the same time very horrifying to watch.
Yeah, it is like a pretty earnest depiction of mental illness.
Yeah,
at a certain point.
Sort of, in a way.
There's a lot of things to be read into this movie, and like I think like when this movie came out, it's kind of like big claim to fame is like it's about there's pretty explicit depictions of sex, like there's explicit themes about Catholicism, and like there's like the transgressive nature of it. Whereas now I just sort of see like some of that has given root to things about like marriage and like mental illness and like how and like the people who surround you.
Yeah.
While still also being about, like, creepy New York royalty apartments.
Yeah, well, I mean, all great horror movies have that kind of weird, like, psychosexual undertone to them.
This has it in spades.
Or under taste, if you will. But even if you're not looking for that subtext, I mean, this is just a very... entertaining movie, and like just a really weird look at like this woman's, escalating paranoia and sense that she is like all alone in the world and cannot trust anybody. Like her doctor seems to be also conspiring against her.
Yeah.
Her husband may in fact be in on this. Her neighbors. God, Ruth Gordon in this movie is so incredible as this older woman with this great voice, which apparently is her real voice.
That's fantastic.
That's all just great stuff.
Oh my God.
Like,
it's really charming.
Yeah, and I think, like, as a portrait of kind of... The Catholic guilt thing is a little bit weird, because, like, Rosemary isn't really, like, a religious character.
No, well, I think it's about, like, I guess it's about, like, guilt about, like, her falling out of the faith and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
They bring up Catholicism at, like, several points in it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's all interesting.
And I guess, like, when you give birth to the Antichrist, I think, like, religious themes are kind of overt at that point.
Yeah.
Big thing to agree on.
Right. I think this movie is hurt, like, a little bit by how ingrained in popular culture it's become. That's not necessarily its fault, but, like, you know, I think the ending of the movie is so well known that, like, as you're watching it, you're kind of like, oh, I kind of know where this is going.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the thing about it.
So that kind of doesn't ruin it, but does kind of make her, like, venture down into this, like, witchcraft rabbit hole. Like, you know,
like, oh, I know where we're going.
You know she's right, so it's kind of weird watching it with that in mind.
Yeah, but like the movie can't really predict what a cultural icon it's going to be.
Right,
it's kind of difficult, really. I can't really say anything about that other than, like, I guess just know nothing about culture going in.
Yeah, no, that's extra filmmaking. That's not really fair. Yeah. But lots of great stuff. Lots of great filmmaking in this movie. I love how it mixes, like, the classical kind of aesthetic with, like, a lot more kind of modern and, like, even some handheld kind of stuff. And
it kind of looks like a Powell and Pressburger movie at times. If, like, it's deep shadows, yet, like, deep, but also, like, deep Technicolor.
Yeah.
Which is just really wonderful to watch.
Yeah, that's all really well done. And also, like, I love that, like, recurring shot in the movie where, like, you're kind of looking, like, through a doorway and not quite seeing, like, what's inside of the doorway. Like, you're getting just enough of a glimpse of it where it kind of makes you, like, lean over trying to see what's going on.
Yeah, well, even, like, at the end of this movie, there was, like, some really interesting, like, and I just can't imagine this kind of filmmaking in, like, classic Hollywood, where it's, like, it just goes to pitch black. All we see is, like, a keyhole, and, like, they turn all the lights off. And you just don't know what's there until, like, she opens up a door. I'm like, I can't imagine, like, classic Hollywood doing that.
Yeah.
It is one of those films where it's, like, it's both kind of, we're not quite into, like, full, like, 60s, like, sexual revolution, like, transgression that we'll get into with The Exorcist. There's still kind of, like, that safety of classic Hollywood leering over. It kind of reminds me of, like, there is the Manchurian Candidate in that regard. Yeah, it's kind of like a borderline picture.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. Although Manchurian Candidate came out in what, like 62, 63?
Yeah, 62. Yeah, there's like that, but that sort of like principle is retained.
Right. Well, I mean, there's frontal nudity in this movie.
Yeah, there is.
Which is a bit jarring to see, sort of. Although not as jarring as
it's like seeing frontal nudity in a Powell and Pressburger movie. That's kind of like because just the look of it.
Yeah. Although it's not quite as jarring as all the stuff that's in The Exorcist, which we'll get to in a minute. But yeah,
or some of the stuff in Black Narcissus for to be fair. But
so yeah, I just really enjoyed this movie. It's a very engaging, very well made piece of cinema. I think it does drag a little bit toward the end, but, like, that ending scene I think is just fantastic.
I think the filmmaking carries it through. Like, it is just so exuberant and, like, fun to watch.
Yeah.
At that lesser point, I think, like, it makes up for its sort of, like, story doldrums at times.
Yeah. Although also, just to get back to this, because I think it bears addressing.
It does.
That scene after kind of the rape nightmare sequence where she wakes up and John Cassavetes is like, "Oh, you passed out. I had sex with you while you were passed out. It was kind of fun." In, like, I believe the exact words that he says are in, like, a necrophiliac sort of way or something.
Yeah, and, like, the movie doesn't return to that.
The movie does not address that, and when that happened, I was kind of like, oh boy, and especially in the wake of everything that Polanski has done.
Yeah, especially, like, knowing who Polanski is.
That's
just makes that so much worse.
That's real rough.
So yeah, like, I guess, like, to watch this movie, you need to know, like, yeah, a man rapes his wife while she sleeps. That's text.
Well, no, he doesn't, because she was actually raped by the devil, so... But he does present that as a viable excuse and thing that, I don't know, that's all that's all not so good there.
Paint what, like, rape culture, misogynistic musings you want into that.
Yeah. But hey, besides that, really fun movie.
yeah, really entertaining. It's a great classic horror film.
Yeah. I like it a lot.
It isn't all that scary at times.
It's not super scary, but it is unsettling. Like I think
the paranoia is distressing at
Yeah,
times.
yeah. Watching Mia Farrow like act the way she does and react the way she does is it does make you shrink away from the television at points. Oh yes. So let's talk then about William Friedkin's The Exorcist.
Well, Tyler,
Yes.
what do you think of The Exorcist?
I liked it. It's a very, very well made, very good, very, very, very scary movie. It's got a lot of great horrific things in it.
Yeah, I think her bent backwards, blood coming out of her mouth.
I think that's
a twisting thing for me.
Oof.
That's I'm like, holy shit, how do they do that?
Yeah. Yeah, lots of kind of jarring profanity and sexual stuff in this movie. They
say the C word in this movie.
They say the C word. There's lots of F-bombs. There's lots of really weird kind of sexual stuff. There's
sex cocks in hell.
Oof. There's a scene
in 1973 is oh boy.
I can't even imagine.
You bring your grandmother to the cinema.
That's stuff that would be shocking in movies today. Even
then you just go holy fuck.
There's a scene where a girl stabs a cross, a 12-year-old girl is stabbing herself in the vagina with a cross, I'm pretty sure.
And the use and there's psychosexual shit
all over it.
But as we know, Tyler, it's all about the church.
It's all about the church.
Always about the church.
Yeah, lots of very good stuff in this movie. It was a very different movie from what I was expecting. I will say.
What were you expecting?
I don't know. Well, I guess the main thing is that I kind of assumed the actual exorcism took up a lot more of the movie. I also had thought that the priests were kind of the main characters of the movie, which is really not the case.
There is a very visible and noted priest in it, but you don't follow him for as long as you think you would.
Well,
Max von Sydow was barely in it.
Max von Sydow was barely in the movie. That was shocking to me.
Yeah, that's what I didn't expect. I didn't expect him to be in as little of it as he was.
Also, fun fact, apparently they put old age makeup on him for this because he was only 44 when they made this movie.
Oh, interesting.
That was one thing.
Max von Sydow seems pretty old.
Well, yeah, I looked it up because I was like, how old was he when he made this? Because he already looks old as the hills in this movie. So that's just a testament to the makeup skills, I guess.
Oh, the makeup's incredible in this movie.
Yeah. I don't know. The setup in this movie takes a really long time. And that's not.
There is kind of it's kind of the slow build of there's a lot of I think one of the most interesting things in the movie is the conflict between the doctors and religious beliefs, where it's there's so much of this movie is it an exorcism, and there's some kind of almost corporate bureaucracy of the church saying well, you have to follow these guidelines for it to be exorcism.
Yeah.
And I think that's all really interesting.
Yeah, that's all interesting stuff. You also get this weird kind of subplot with the priest and his mother, which you're really not sure where that's going until you get to the actual exorcism, and that pays off in spades.
Holy fuck!
So that all does. I'm not criticizing the setup of this at all. It all does pay off spectacularly. I think
you just wanted it to be just a bit more batshit than the kind of slow burn that it is.
Yeah, well, it was just we were talking about expectations, earlier. This is a movie where my expectations were really kind of confounded by what the movie actually is, and that's not the movie's fault.
Yeah, well, everything you see of this movie is Reagan saying your mother sucks cocks in hell, and things flying, and people jumping out windows. It is really, and granted, that finale is really fucking intense.
Yeah.
Most of the movie isn't that.
Right,
Most
exactly.
Of the movie is the mother talking to priests and doctors about the nature of what is happening to her daughter.
Right.
And that's all interesting in itself, but it's not people saying your mother sucks cocks in hell.
Right. The vomit and the bed shaking and the head spinning, that's all
deep voice.
Pretty late in the game, and I feel once the actual exorcism does start, the movie kind of turns on the proverbial third heat.
That is a tour de force, that exorcism at the end.
It's an incredible sequence, and it's extremely well done. everything involved in that sequence is great. From the makeup to
the acting,
the voice acting, the effects, everything. It's all great.
It is like horror filmmaking turned up to 11.
Yeah. And I don't know that I've ever seen a movie as viscerally in your face, like scary and sometimes horrifying than this movie is.
Just like the sound effects at times, or like there's like that constant like breathing, and like it feels like bones are being cracked at several points, especially like the famous head spinning thing, which my parents love to use.
Well, John, I definitely didn't dislike this movie. I really did enjoy it a lot. It
seemed like you liked it.
I liked it, yeah, but I'm sensing that you liked it a lot more than I did. So
yeah, well, I guess like it comes down to like I just think like a lot of the Catholic shit in it is just like really fascinating, and like a lot of like the conflict between like them like trying to describe it in like medical terms, and like people describe like this is not science, this is religion, and like I think that's all really interesting.
Yeah.
The priest who's in the climax is a really interesting character.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, like, one thing I did really like about this movie is like it really shows you like priests like real people. Like they smoke, they drink beer, they occasionally curse. They just kind of hang out with each other. Like it's all interesting. And
there's a certain point. At one point, he just starts punching Reagan.
Yeah.
And, like, that is just, I'm like, holy fuck, he's hitting a little girl.
Right, yeah. And, I mean, well, you know, in this day and age...
Like possessed or otherwise, and, like, in filmic terms, we're seeing a grown man hit a 12-year-old in 1973.
Right. And, you know, obviously, like, from a modern perspective, like, it's not super shocking to hear that Catholic priests do bad things, but...
Yeah, well, no, but, like, in the case of, like, but they're all like treated with humanity, and like the bureaucracy of it all is really interesting.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't quite see like a presentation of the church as something kind of like bureaucratic, like a hospital.
Right.
I haven't seen that kind of depiction of it before.
Yeah. That's all really good stuff. And yeah, William Friedkin, I think, really understood the kind of movie that he was making, and that all works really, really well.
What else has William Friedkin made?
The French Connection, which I've never actually seen.
Oh, I need to see that.
He's made even some movies like pretty recently, I think. Like he made that movie called Killer Joe, which the Vidiots talk about all the time.
Oh,
which
shit. Yeah,
which was rated NC-17 and starred Matthew McConaughey. Came out in 2011.
Maybe we shall. I'd be curious to go back to this especially Killer Joe.
Yeah. I've also heard his movie Sorcerer is also really interesting.
So yeah, I think we were pretty entertained this week.
Yeah, this was a fun week. This was a couple of very interesting...
Great palate cleanser for last week.
Yeah. But, you know, it's good to know that horror has produced some really quite excellent works in the past.
Oh yeah, well, it's something to say. Like, well, to say that there are no good horror films is just a blatantly absurd statement.
Yes.
And like, we're just not. I guess like horror is just figuring out like how to be transgressive in an age with the internet.
Yeah, that's a good point actually.
Because like on the internet, you can just find the just most disgusting and absurd things possible.
Right.
And like how you as a filmmaker top that while still like making something that is palatable. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you do it. I guess like Jordan Peele leaned into race as like his big like transgressive thing.
Well, I think maybe the solution is to just focus less on like the visceral kind of scares of it and try to make the framework interesting.
Yeah, well, of course, like the basic thing is like make a good movie.
Well, yeah,
like understand, like shoot it well,
Always.
get good actors, like all the basics and like that sort of thing. But like there's like so much of like modern cinema that's like trying to like, okay, how do we be scary again? Like I think that's where like I think that's how like the found footage movie became like such a reoccurring thing, because like it was something like, okay, let's just steal from the internet.
Yeah. I guess I would say that like with Get Out, like I think what we're finding now is that like social horror maybe is like the way to go.
That's interesting.
Like we've kind of moved past the point where like all this psychosexual stuff is really affecting to us anymore.
We're
just
so beyond the sexual revolution.
Right. Our society, sex is so deeply ingrained in our society now that
watch a Judd Apatow movie and hear someone talking about anal fisting.
Right. It doesn't have the power to shock that it once did. Although The Exorcist proves that you can still...
Yeah, well, The Exorcist is just so visceral and just so, like, deeply ingrained in what it's about.
Yeah.
I think a religion will always be, like, a testy thing.
Yeah. That's true.
I think recently there was, like, an indie game called Faith, and it's, like, this one, I know, like, pretentious title aside... And it's like it's made like an 8-bit Atari game, and it's full of like renditions of like classic choral chanting in like 8-bit and like text to speech, and it manages to be really upending and really disturbing somehow, just by like. If anything, that might be displaying just like the disparate elements of it, like 8-bit video games in the Catholic Church of all things.
Yeah.
But I think there is still transgression to be got at, and like we just need to stop making slasher movies all the time.
Well, with religion, I think that just goes back to the principle of social horror, and so that's interesting stuff. Although speaking of slasher movies, one other just kind of classic, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like the original, tends to show up on like a lot of like greatest film lists. Like apparently that movie was incredibly artistic in a way that most of these movies aren't.
Yeah, well, the thing you most hear about is that, like, it's like, isn't it like they have, like, real footage from it, from the real event, or...
Is that what it is? I don't know.
Well, like, I guess, like, this is all telephonic shit at some point, but, like, there was, like, a really, like, transgressive, like, history about it.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is in the Sight and Sound, top 250, which is not something I would expect. So
interesting.
We may come back to that at some point, but I think this is as good a time as any to close the book on Spooktober.
You want to kill it now?
Well, I mean, we could do it for like one more week because we'd be like within the range, but like,
I mean, we'd be recording on the. That's a problem. By the time we get these things out, it'd be.
Well, by the time we get it out, it'd be after Halloween. It'd be close, but like, I don't know. I think this discussion we've had is as good a place as any to kind of close it out.
I don't know where else we'd venture with this. I think you're right.
And I also just kind of want to get back to good old-fashioned movies.
I do too. So, oh god, like we've been talking about so much because like we've just been stuck so much in like themed monthly sessions.
We haven't had a non-themed period since before June, I think. So. Yeah. We're a little casting about here.
We're washing stuff. So Tyler,
what's
on your list? Because you actually write this shit down, and I'm too lazy to.
I do. Let's see. Well, there are a few things we could do. David Lynch is someone we could always look at. I'm not sure if this week would be the best week for that.
You've never seen Eraserhead, right?
I've never seen Eraserhead, no.
That'd be interesting.
Oh, there was something I was going to suggest. Oh. I forgot. Back when Jonathan Demme passed away earlier this year, and I had wanted to do like a tribute episode watching a couple of his movies, and we never actually did that. So that's something we could do, potentially.
Oh, that could be something. Well, what movies did you have in mind?
Well, I really wanted to see this movie, Rachel Getting Married. Which is a more recent one of his that Anne Hathaway was in it. I've just heard like lots of really good things about it. And then he also made this movie in the 80s called Something Wild, I believe. And Ray Liotta is in it. I think that was one of his like first roles.
I kind of just want to do like what like we used to do, where just like we just choose like two movies that are just like completely unrelated.
Okay.
Kind of that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we could also do that.
Have you ever seen Dogtooth?
I've not seen Dogtooth. Ooh, that new Yorgos Lanthimos movie is coming out pretty soon. This could be a good excuse to watch that.
Ooh.
I'd be up for that.
Oh, so Dogtooth is on there?
Okay. We can do Dogtooth, and then what do we want to pair that with?
It has to be something that is like something we could elaborate with conversation, but not entirely like related, like we've just been doing for like the past like 4 months.
Yeah. Ooh. You haven't seen Unbreakable, have you?
Unbreakable and Dogtooth? I'm all for that. I'm all for that.
Okay, alright, here we go. Alright, so...
This will be my third M. Night Shyamalan movie.
After what? The Happening and
The Sixth Sense. Because I think everyone's seen The Sixth Sense.
Oh, you have seen The Sixth Sense, okay.
I've seen The Sixth Sense. I'd be willing to revisit, though, I think... I'm not sure that'd be, like, podcast material, though I should revisit that.
Well, my roommates haven't seen that, so I will probably rewatch that at some point.
That's something that movie's great.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Alright, so M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable and Yorgos Lanthimos' Dogtooth.
Both of these are, I guess, like, the only real thing we can compare is, like, both of these are filmmakers whom we have, like, a sort of expectation going in.
Yeah, that's kind of true.
And I think, like, I guess, like, what we could play is comparing, like, and this is all going to go out the window by the time we actually do this, because we all have terrible memories, is, like, comparing, like, what we expect from this compared to, like, what we actually get. Because I really have, I know far more about, like, Unbreakable than I do, like, Dogtooth, but I'm still not entirely sure what I'm going to fully get from either.
I know stuff about Dogtooth, but I'm still not sure I know what to expect from it.
Yeah, so... That'll be something I'm excited for this week.
That will be interesting. Alright, so Dogtooth and Unbreakable coming your way next time. This should be fun.
I hope it is.
Alright.
Thank you, friends, for indulging us once again.
Yes, always. And we'll see you next time. That's just one I've been meaning to watch.
I'm just looking on the internet for disparate things. Have you ever seen Fantasia?
I have seen Fantasia.
Okay.
Boy, that'd be a weird-ass episode. Dogtooth and Fantasia.